It's a typical Sunday morning in October 2013 at the Milthorpe family home in Albury, New South Wales. Michelle is roused awake by her 5-year-old daughter Rose, who desperately wants to tell her something. That something will change the family's lives forever. In that moment, Rose discloses a shocking incident of sexual assault she says happened at the hands of a family friend. As her mum struggles to get her head around what her little girl has just told her, Rose asks another question. "Mum, can I watch TV now?" Of course. Left alone, Michelle is in a state of shock. She can't speak. She vomits while trying to tell her husband. Rose wouldn't say that if it wasn't true. She sits down on her 8-year-old daughter Pippa's bed and gently asks about Rose's disclosure. Michelle can feel the bile returning. It's been happening to Pippa as well. It's been happening to both girls for years. For Michelle, she will remember today as the worst of her life, but for her girls, it's the day things got a little bit better. It's the day the abuse finally stopped. I'm Gemma Barth, and you're listening to True Crime Conversations, a podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. The man was charged and the case went to trial. He was only convicted of the charges related to Pippa, not her little sister Rose. Michelle thought the fight for justice would re-empower her children. Instead, it re-traumatised them. As a mum and a teacher, Michelle was left devastated and angered by how her girls were treated by the New South Wales legal system. Now much older themselves, Pippa and Rose have been fighting alongside their mother for changes to the way child victims are treated by the courts. Michelle joins us now to talk about it all. Michelle, thank you for joining us on True Crime Conversations. I'd love you to paint the picture for me of what your family life looked like pre-disclosure day.
Look, Brent, my husband, and I moved to Albury with an 8-week-old baby in 2003. And we were just in that real hustle and bustle of, busy having kids. Well, you know what it's like.
Trenches.
We've got little people.
I do.
Definitely in the trenches. So Pip came along in 2005 and Rose in 2008. And look, we had done lots of different things. Like Brent had been over working in Western Australia for a time as well. So away for, 3 or 4 weeks at a time. And, just doing those things that you do to live the Australian dream, I suppose, back in that time. I was teaching as well, and then we owned a small business, and, there was lots of different things that was going on, and we played sport and our kids were involved in that. We were just really what you would possibly call just that regular, boring young couple with kids. Yeah.
And I guess pre everything happening, you would say that your kids were happy, healthy, thriving kids.
Yeah, definitely. And we had some challenges with their health and things like that, but nothing outside of ordinary. And they were amazing little people. And it was just a very idyllic time.
And then came Sunday, October 27th, 2013, which was disclosure day, as you call it. Tell me about what happened that day.
So we had, it had been a weird sort of lead up to that time because both Pippa and Rose were not enjoying sleeping on their own. Mm-hmm. So Brent was often with one and I was with another, and Rose woke me up early that morning and said, Mum, and I was, Mum.
I know the sound
the
well.
3-syllable Mum. Can I tell you something? And then she just dropped a bomb and, she said, I don't like it when such and such licks my vagina. And I was kind of only half awake and I said, I beg your pardon, what did you say? And she said it again. And I sort of sat in that moment and realised that I sort of had 1 or 2 ways to go. And, I'm a mandatory reporter. I've done a lot of training around this type of thing as a teacher. And so I just sort of said, oh, that's not good. What else does he do that you don't like, So we sort of started this conversation and then she finished and said, can I watch Tutu now? Which was the ABC Kids channel. Like she hadn't just dropped a bomb on our world. And, I got up and actually vomited. I felt I just couldn't believe that she had said that. And, you know, she was 5. She'd just turned 5. We'd had her pirate princess party a couple of weeks earlier, like,
Yeah.
you know, all of these things. And anyway, and she did say to me at the time, Pippa said that she doesn't think he's allowed to do that. And so it kind of, you know, made me realise that, you know, there was other things going on. So I woke Bren up and he thought someone had died because I actually couldn't get the words out. I didn't know how to speak to him about it.
I can imagine.
And then I went into Pip and, you know, had a conversation with her, and she actually couldn't speak. She couldn't speak because I just said to her that Rose had told me something that that somebody had been, you know, doing something to her that she didn't like, and, you know, was there anything that she needed to tell me? And she just started crying. Yeah, she put the pillow over her head first, and then she started crying. And so she wrote down things that were happening.
It's such a mum thing to, on the outside, calm, collected, talking to your children. Oh, thank you. What's next? But then inside, I can only imagine that you were.
Oh, I just felt sick. I did. And, you know, the day, like I could probably step through most of the day. There's little bits in the afternoon where even when I was being questioned in court about it, I was just like, oh, I don't know, you know, and I was getting criticised for not remembering, you know, where I was sitting in the lounge room, but I literally felt like the wheels had just fallen off by that point.
I feel like that's a pretty normal response to trauma, to not remember something.
Yeah.
This man, he was a family friend, wasn't he? Can you tell us about how he was involved in your family?
So because we'd moved down to Albury, we had moved away from our friends and our family. So we sort of had made friends with people who could help us out. So his wife helped us out sometimes looking after the kids, and, you know, she became like family. She was very mum-like to me, and I actually think that was the hardest thing that, you know, part of the hardest thing was that this was sort of happening on her watch. And yeah, so sometimes the kids would go over there, sometimes they would stay there. And we just obviously had no idea what was going on. But yeah, it was, so they filled a bit of a void where our family were. And
so they were almost like de facto grandparents.
They were, yeah.
And is that how your kids treated them as well?
Yep. Yeah, they even went into Grandparents' Day at school.
How long had the abuse been happening?
When one of the girls were asked that question, they said every time I went there. Yeah.
And they'd known him
their whole life. Yeah. Yeah.
So as long as they can remember.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and, you know, that was the thing that was really difficult with the whole police stuff, because, you know, you go there initially and say, this is what I've been told, this is what I've, you know, the kids have written down in Pippa's case, and this is the stuff, and you do that initial statement. For me, over the next couple of years, it was more and more and more.
As in they were disclosing
more and more. And it's like, well, how often do you put them through going and making a statement?
Yeah.
Because it was cruel to do that when you want them to be healing. And then as they've got older and they're understanding of what happened, didn't expect to do this.
You're all right. It's a lot.
It's oh gosh, if we knew then what we know now. Yep.
You're gonna make me cry.
Sorry. Yeah.
So it also sounds like, as mum, the girls were telling you. They were telling you everything. That's a lot for a mum to hold.
I think, you know, what is it? A problem shared is a problem halved. So that was sort of the way it happened, and I'm glad that could be my role, you know.
I mean, how beautiful that they felt comfortable enough to share those details with you.
Yeah, and look, you know, that sort of, you talk about the grooming process too. It was having to unwind a very long process of grooming. You know,
years.
if you tell them your dad's going to think you're disgusting, if you tell them you're not ever going to be able to see his wife again, if you tell them, you know, people are going to think poorly of you, or, you know, this is our little secret, people will be jealous of that, you know, like all of those things. It was having to unwind all of that very careful, considered grooming process. And that's something I don't think that we talk about often enough.
Yeah.
Like, even as a family, like for Brent and I, we were groomed by him as well.
Your whole family was.
Yeah. So, as I said, in retrospect, hindsight's a bitch.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. It
Mm-hmm.
slaps you in the face. But yeah.
Why do you think Rose chose that Sunday if it had been happening for so long?
My understanding was that it was getting worse. So
Right.
the offending was worse, and more invasive. So she was being hurt. And she had come home a couple of weeks earlier, and there was some, you know, again, hindsight, I was like, oh, okay, you know,
Let's go there. Let's talk about the hindsight. What were the signs that, when you look back,
when
were
we
signs?
look back, so there were things like the kids loving going there and then not wanting to anymore, and they all sort of went through that stage of not wanting to be there anymore. There was some selective mutism with adults, particularly when they went to school. Urinary tract infections,
Mm-hmm.
repeat urinary tract infections. I know, you know, Brent sort of remembers a time when he went to pick Rose up and she was hiding under a table down the back. And, you know, he said at the time he thought it was just like hide and seek, but it wasn't, you know. So Rose, and, you know, this has sort of been reported on too, Rose actually asked me to make her a superhero cape. So she came home from their house that day and she took it off and threw it on the ground and stamped on it. And I was like, what are you doing? Because, you know, we'd spent a lot of time making this cape, and she said it didn't work. And I said, what do you mean? What was your superpower? And she said, I wanted to be invisible, but he still found me. You know, and at the time, I just didn't think anything of it.
No, because in isolation, all of these things.
Like, and this is isolation over a number of years, because people have said to me, oh, you must regret this or you must regret that. I can't, because if I went down that rabbit hole, I don't think I'd be able to get out. I honestly don't. You know, I can't look back. I can't change the things that happened, but we can use it to have conversations with mums and dads and say, you know, these are some of the things that were flags for us, and have conversations with your children, because these are some of the things that were flags.
Well, I was thinking for your 5-year-old to use the language, vagina and all the terms, had you taught your girls about all of that stuff and all the consent?
Yep, I had. And this is the thing. So, you know, this wasn't an unfamiliar path for me. You know, second generation child abuse survivors live in my family. And I thought that I had prepared them very well for that. And, you know, I was lucky that Rose used the words that she did, because it gave me no doubt that she was talking about those particular body parts. But, you know, it's again, it goes to show the nature of that grooming and how well it can be done to make people feel like it's okay. Yeah.
Is there any advice to parents who are having those conversations with their kids? Like right now, I've got very young kids, and I'm even starting those consent conversations now with my son. You know, this is your body. Is there a way you wish you did it, or is it just that grooming overtakes it no matter what in this instance? I
don't want to say that it overtakes it, because I don't want to give people this hopelessness around it, because that's not fair to anybody. But it's always, I think, being open to any conversations, even if they're, you know, little ones, like when you pick them up And you don't, because I'm a teacher, I always worry about people who get their kids in the car and say, how was your day? No, how was your day really? Trying to see if there was any bad things. I think it's really just being very honest with them about nobody is allowed to touch you where you don't want to be touched. You are allowed to always tell me if something makes you uncomfortable. Talk about what those uncomfortable feelings are, with the feelings in the tummy and, those things. But also to say to them, sometimes people might say that you're not allowed to tell me something, but you can always tell me anything. I think that's the really important thing.
So it's broadening those consent conversations to include grooming.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is sad, but I think that's the real force out there, is that people, as I said, I thought my kids were well prepared. I thought that they knew that no one could do those things to them because of the conversations we'd had. What I didn't expect was that someone so trusted would make them feel like they couldn't talk to me about it.
Yeah. So once you had this information from the girls, what was your next move?
So I rang his wife and asked her to come to our house because, as I said, she was like family to us. And she came around and I told her what the girls had told me. And she wasn't shocked.
Really?
So instead of saying no, like if someone came and saw me about that, I'd be like, no.
You'd get defensive, wouldn't you?
Very much so. And it was just like, oh my God, what have you done? What have you done? And immediately I was like, it wasn't a reaction that I was expecting. So that happened. I'd actually packed up a lot of things that had been given to me by her and gave them back. It sounds so weird. People are like,
it's
why
a breakup
did you do
of
that?
some sort.
Yeah. So, it felt like she died to us that day. And, from her continued support of him, that's kind of what happened. So that happened. She actually went and got him, and he came round as well. Brent had taken the girls to the park. She went and got him, and he came round and was blustering and walked in the door, and then realised that it was serious. And my conversation with him was, tell me why they would say that. And then I actually reframed it and said, no, tell me how. Like, how could they have said that? Because they don't know about that. Like, they're little girls. They don't know any of this. And he couldn't answer that question. So he left. I rang the school principal, the girls' school principal, and I think that was my way of putting this protection up between me and having to make the call to the police.
Right, okay.
Because
the school has to.
They have to.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to make that phone call. And anyway, so she came around and she called the police. And then they came. And this is the thing. So this is where you stop knowing things, So the police came around. I expected that they would talk to the girls.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, no, the girls, we can't have a conversation with them. They need to stay away. And we're like, oh, righto. So, okay. So then Bran and I were in our front room of our house, and I was pacing. Like, I was just walking up and down, and I was just saying, I still remember saying, I just don't know how this could be happening. It's not like we don't sit around watching porn. Like, I don't know how this happened. I just don't know how they could know about this. And I looked over, and this massive policeman sitting in this chair with like tears.
Oh.
And I was like, and I looked at him, and he goes, because it happened. They know because it happened, And then they said, oh, the JERT team would be in contact. And we were like, oh, okay. Okay.
So I'm assuming the JERT team is like child abuse.
Yeah. So the Joint Investigative Response Team were going to be the next team to be in contact with us. And we were just like, oh, okay. And then the end of Monday came and we hadn't had any calls. And I was like, oh, this is really weird. And then Tuesday, so I rang on Tuesday, I rang the police station and said, look, this happened on the weekend just wondering what's happening, and they're like, oh, we'll put you through to the child abuse squad. Got put through the child abuse squad. Oh, look, we've had to look at who's doing your case because you actually know a couple of the police officers here, and we don't want it to be tainted, yada yada. And like, we knew they were police officers, we didn't know what they did, so that sort of put a put on. And then I rang back, I was like, well, what are we meant to do in the meantime, because I've got, like, my kids are here,
Yeah, and they've just told me something
yeah,
huge and no one cares.
yeah. And it feels to them, oh well, they're safe. It's like, yep, they are, but I need to tell them what the time frame is. Anyway, the part of the joint is having someone from the from sexual assault service as part of that, and also of DCJ, or docs as they were back then. So the person from the sexual assault service came round to our house and just sort of went through that process with us. But it was because I was quite dogged in, well, what happens next? And I did have, Pip particularly was sitting at home. She's very principled, and she was like, well, they obviously don't care. Yeah. They do not care. If they cared, they would have talked to us by now. So she was sort of in that mindset. And again, she'd been told that people wouldn't believe her and all that sort of thing. So it was not sitting well with her. And it took 8 days. 8 days. Yeah. So I actually took the kids to school the day after. And it was always this thing that I looked back on and was like, that's so mean. Like, why did you take them to school? But I think my reasoning was that we needed to keep things normal.
And structure helps.
Yeah. And I think I needed a minute too to just lose it.
Without little ears. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did that.
Have the girls probably don't even remember that, do they? As a bad thing.
No.
Exactly. So stop beating yourself up. Yeah. You did what you had to do.
Someone said to me, a counsellor said to me a little while later, she said, you need to stop beating yourself up. She said, because the reality is that on that day, their life got better. It was yours that changed. So.
And imagine the opposite. You kept them at home. You had your mental breakdown in front of them.
Yeah, that's it.
Further there,
ugly.
You needed space.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, anyway, so it was all, it was a bit of a just hurry up and wait, which sort of, if I had to name the next 2.5 years of our life, that's sort of what it felt like. So, yeah, and look, that 2.5 years is the kids don't have an opportunity to move on.
Yeah.
They don't have an opportunity to just leave that bit behind and get onto the healing. It's all sort of about waiting and just pausing in this space. Like, Rose started school the year after, so 2014, and she did not learn how to read until she finished court. So
let's go to when the girls were finally interviewed.
Yep.
What was that like? Were you allowed in with them?
No.
That's bizarre to me because...
Yeah.
Shouldn't a guardian be allowed with them?
No. So we weren't with them. We were obviously just down the hall, but it was the detective and the DCJ social worker. So they were together in the interview room. And Pip was really angry by the time we got there because she felt that, no one was listening and no one cared, and why did we tell this, because now we don't get to see this lady anymore, and all of those things.
Yeah.
And so I actually said within her earshot, because the police officer just said quietly to us, I just need to let you know that 9 times out of 10 we can't do anything because we don't get enough evidence from the children. Like, they just don't. It's not because we don't believe them. It's because we know that we don't want to take them through the process.
Right.
Which that would be a really hard place to be in as a police officer. Like, I can't imagine the vicarious trauma that happens through that as well. Anyway, I just said to him, well, you haven't met Pippa Millthorpe yet. She's amazing. She has such a great eye for detail. she'll be able to tell you whatever's happened to her so that she can protect other children.
You said Rose became kind of a protector. What about
Yeah.
Pippa?
Pip withdrew. Yeah.
She was a bit older, so
Yeah. So she really withdrew into herself for a long time, and she is a very deep thinker, very deep feeling person. She still is. She's fabulous, as they all are. But yeah, it was really hard, and I think too, she had this real sadness, and she really missed the particularly the lady in this, and so there was a lot there for her to process. Rose, I don't know if it was being a bit younger or if it was just, she considered her role to be all right. I'm okay, I'm all right. And then obviously we had Mags, our eldest daughter, as well, who was very much part of all of this, and there as the big sister watching it all unfold. And also she had to talk to the police as well as a witness to things. And yeah, it was just it was a tricky time trying to balance it all out, and we just did the best that we could.
And during this time, this 2.5 years, he was on bail.
Yeah.
And you live in a reasonably small place.
Yeah. So
that must have been intimidating.
It was. And, there was this, we wanted to, get the girls confident enough to go and, if we were in the shopping centre, you can go and get some donuts from Donut King, or, you can go to Big W and look in the toy section while I'm over here in the homeware section. But you have to have the conversations. Just remember, if you see him, you have to do this and that, so things that other kids didn't have to do. So it was being vigilant without being scared. And so we had to minimize his power.
Did you see him?
No, we didn't. Brent saw him a couple of times, and he smiled and laughed at him. Yeah. And I didn't see him again until we started in court in Albury, because we started there first, before it was adjourned and moved to Sydney. So I hadn't seen him until then, and the girls saw him there too. He was not far away. He was probably about 7 meters away from where we were sitting. Yeah. Which
is another problem we need to talk about with the court system and children, is that the case goes to trial, and the girls, after 2.5 years of living with this trauma and worrying about this trial, end up in a courtroom with the person that they say abused them sitting right there.
So, all their evidence and things were given via, like, in another room. But where you wait to give that evidence is in the same corridor as the offender. So that was something that was really tricky, and some people may have heard this story before, but my brother came and he spent some time with us my whole family were there. Like, we were very, very well supported by our family and friends, but my brother was there, and he had lived with us for a period of time and been one of those people that had dropped the kids off there when we needed to. And, there's this little bit of guilt that everyone carries for doing that, even though we shouldn't. Anyway, he was there, and he could see that the girls were feeling uncomfortable. And so he sort of looked out the door, and he's like, "Oh, is that him?" I said, "Yeah, that's him." And he's going, "Geez, he's got old." It's like, "Yeah, he has, hasn't he?" He goes, "I think he's got a bit fat too." And the girls started giggling, and I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "He's just an old fat motherfucker." Anyway, I don't care what anyone thinks. That was his name from then on. He was just the motherfucker. And it minimized his power, and it gave our girls this element of power back, because they were little girls that had never said words like that before.
I was going to say motherfucker to how old were they? 7 and 11 would have been Oh
Yeah.
my goodness.
It was a bit of a power thing. So
well done to your brother, because trying to break
Yeah.
that ice
yeah,
and give them their power back,
it was
like what a
pretty
legend.
special. Yeah.
So you mentioned that it started in Albury and then the decision was made to go to Sydney.
Yeah.
Tell me about that move to Sydney, because you had to come for a number of weeks.
Yeah, we were here for 4.5 weeks. And, just to backpedal a bit too, you live in a regional community, you go to court, people are on jury duty. There were 2 people that we knew who were on jury duty that day, and one of them was meant to be replacing me at work because I was it was just this really strange circumstance. So look, it was probably a bonus that it got moved up here because it was fresh. No one knew anybody involved. Initially they said it would be 10 days, so we're like, yeah, we can do 10 days, that's okay. And then as it turned out, it was just this long drawn out horrendous process, and 4.5 weeks, and we did not go home because Pip at that point was a suicidal 11-year-old.
Oh my gosh.
And we knew that if we had gone home, it would have been really hard to get back here again.
Yeah. Right.
I know my daughter well enough to know that if we had have gone home and she didn't see it through, she would have found it really hard to live through that.
To move on.
Yeah. So, as cruel as it felt at the time, and probably even just looking back, we didn't go home. We stayed here, and I had family living here, so that sort of made it easy to go and see them and do things with them on the weekend. Do the Manly ferry and have the dolphins swimming beside us on the ferry and all those beautiful things, to try and make it more than just sitting around waiting for court. So yeah, it was horrible. But also there's, we got to leave that here. That's
true. I was going to say, is it hard to be back here?
No, because I like to visit and then I like to go home.
Yeah.
I do like to visit. And the girls have been back since
okay.
too. And there's things that we didn't get to do, like they haven't done a bridge climb yet. Like we still want to do that one.
Neither, and I live here.
There's things that they still want to do. So yeah, it was just a moment in time.
So in terms of what was required of the girls in the trial,
yeah,
what does that look like?
Yeah, so we were so unprepared. So unprepared. And that, I think, that's the idea of that, is that you're not contaminated, you haven't been contaminated. So we came up here, and they have like a trial before the trial.
A pre-trial.
Yes, the pre-trial. It's got a fancy name, Guardia or something like that.
We'll call it the pre-trial.
The pre-trial, right? So we came up and they explained what the pre-trial was. And again, this was people that the kids didn't know.
Yeah.
So they only met our barrister. We call him our barrister. The Crown barrister, just 3 days before. They'd never met him. So we came up and they said, look, we're doing the pre-trial because they're trying to split the cases, which is actually a tactic that people have used in these types of things for a long time. So instead of a jury knowing that there's more than one victim.
Right.
So they were trying to split the cases, and then they were also trying to eliminate the context for how I came to know about it, which was Rose's, declaration of what happened that morning. And they didn't want that to be part of it.
Why?
Because when she spoke to the police, when she did her statement, she wasn't as explicit to them as she had been to me in what had happened.
But why would they think that you removing that part of the story would be allowed? Like,
because they'd always got away with that. They'd always been allowed to do that. So context evidence, has been allowed to be taken out.
Well, they didn't get away with it. You were allowed to do it.
We were allowed to do it. So, but that was, so it's a trial. A pre-trial is a trial. So the girls had to sit and listen to their evidence, and then they had to be asked questions by the judge. And that was a couple of days for each of them. I was, gave my evidence and was cross-examined, and I can honestly say I was unprepared. I was not ready for that. I didn't know what I had to do.
In what way did you find the cross-examination?
It wasn't necessarily examination. It was sort of the level of trickery involved in it was actually, I was sort of looking at the judge waiting for him to say something. It was like, well, I've already answered that question.
And in that way, did they try and like pick apart your story as you're saying it?
Yeah.
And you're like, this happened 2.5 years ago. I'm doing the best I can.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it was a bit like that. But, as we just kept maintaining throughout the whole thing, just tell the truth.
Yeah.
Like if you're telling the truth, you don't have to think about it. Like it's just that it's a recall. Whereas if you're trying to fabricate something, you get it wrong.
Yeah.
So if you just keep telling the truth,
it
eventually wins out, right? So, yeah, the pre-trial was weird to do that, and then that sort of lasted about, I think that was almost 7 days. It was a really long time, and then the trial proper started. And so, Rose was the first one to be called, and so she had to listen to her evidence again. So watching her 5-year-old self speak to a police officer, she had to do that again, and then they started the cross-examination process with her, and a jury member fell asleep.
You're joking.
No. And they had to abandon the trial, and they had to impanel a new jury.
And she had to do it again.
She had to do it again. So Rose actually did it 3 times.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, she did it 3 times.
And to be clear, when the girls are doing it, are they standing in a full courtroom with the judge and everyone? No.
So what happens is out the back, they go out the back and up in the elevator, and there's like a telecom, probably not dissimilar to this, but nowhere near as nice. It's very clinical. So they went up, and so we had to drop them off and just leave them there.
As 7 and 11-year-olds?
Yeah. With my sister was there for the first couple of weeks, and then a friend came up because my sister had little tiny kids at the time.
As in the sister could go with them out the back?
Yeah, she could be out there. She couldn't go into the room with them, but she could be out the back.
It's just wild to me that a 7-year-old isn't allowed a chaperone.
Yeah.
That they know.
Yeah, that's it.
Like, that's wild.
Yeah, so they sit in there and they watch their evidence. So they watch themselves.
Why? So that they can remember.
So that they can remember it. And then they get cross-examined so they just see the barrister and the judge in the courtroom. They're the only people that they can see. So they didn't see him from there.
Yeah.
We saw him on the street, but they didn't see him during that period. But they also didn't see us.
So you weren't allowed to watch any of this, were you?
No, because we were both witnesses. So, to this day, I have never seen their evidence. I don't know what they told the police. And Brent and I have never seen each other's.
Really?
Yeah, because even though I went first and could have been in the courtroom when he gave his evidence, he actually asked me not to be.
Right.
Yeah.
How did the girls, because I'm assuming you haven't seen the cross-examination either.
No.
How did they describe it?
Rose thought it was mean. I remember her just saying, they're being so mean. That man is so mean. I had this impression of the justice system that is so naive. I just look now and think, wow, you're an idiot. Like, I was so naive. The protection was all around the offender and his rights, and it was not at all about, these are children, you cannot speak to children like that. It was, and even any witness, any vulnerable witness, I just think, yeah. So it was absolutely shocking to me that happened. So Rose saw it as mean. Pippa shut down. She shut down. She answered every question that she had to, but he appealed his conviction.
Right.
And when they went back through, so there were 4 judges that went back through and did the appeal, they commented that she answered every question that was asked of her. She just didn't answer it the multiple times that they asked it.
So she just remained silent when he kept asking it.
Yeah.
Good on her.
Yeah, well, she was almost catatonic. Like, she just sat there with tears rolling down her face. And, she said to me, like, the judge told me to stop crying.
They're children.
Yeah.
You're asking them about the most horrible thing that they've ever experienced.
Yeah, yeah. So it was just, it was so unheard of. And look, I look now and just go, the biggest mistake they did was treat my children like that, because by the time it was my turn to go in, I was pretty fired up and they'd given me too much time to learn my statement. So I could actually write it off by heart by the time I went back in, because I was not going to get caught off guard.
Yeah.
And it was just gross. And I just looked at, and I know that everyone has a job to do, but there's a way that you choose to do a job. And I was really disappointed in the lack of humanity.
Well, the lack of protection for victims of crime.
Yeah. But, at that point, everyone's innocent until proven guilty. It was just, it was just disgusting. The innocence of my kids was not considered in that, though.
No.
Yeah.
And we've talked about, there were so many little moments in this process, like the big moments that stung, and then the little moments, like you're talking about them trying to stop you from talking about that first disclosure from Rose. And another one that I've heard you talk about is the person that turned a page for Rose got dismissed.
There's a court-appointed person who can go in with the kids.
Yeah.
And so this lovely lady, her name was Janine, was really nice, and she got to go and sort of stand in the room with the kids, or sit in the room. And, they asked Rose if she could read a part of her statement. And, again, Rose couldn't read. She was just turned 7 and she, wasn't in her jam yet.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Janine turned the page so that she was on the right page. And then they said that was her helping her, and they dismissed her. So Pippa hadn't even started yet, so she actually didn't get the benefit of having her with her. Yeah.
It's just so unnecessary.
Yeah.
Like, just unnecessary
power grabbing.
Yeah, it's just wild.
Yeah. Yeah, look, it was things happened that I couldn't believe. And it was one of those things. So I was actually journaling on the daily because people were supporting us. So I would just write a bit of an update. And sometimes they were just so far-fetched. I was like, no one's going to believe this. It's just ridiculous.
Well, I've heard you describe what happened to your girls in that court process as emotional abuse.
Yeah, it was. And so we had a period of time. It was a Friday, and this was into the third week, Friday and the third week. And Pip was not doing well, and she was she actually had tonsillitis as well, so she was physically unwell. This was all happening. We were told that morning, see, this is another thing that just happens. We were told that morning that it might not be going ahead that day because one of the jury members was sick. So Pip had gone down to Darling Harbour to have a little run around Darling Harbour with some of our friends. And then we got the phone call to say, they got the wrong room. It wasn't your jury. She has to be here in 10 minutes. So they literally had to run from Darling Harbour up to the courthouse, and she had to go in. So she'd already sort of thought, I don't have to do this today.
Yeah, she was in a better headspace.
In a better headspace, and then she had to go back in after all of this. And anyway, so the questioning started. Apparently she wasn't answering questions. She was just sort of sitting there and not wanting to, speak, and did a couple of questions, but not all of them. And the barrister came out, and the Crown barrister came out and talked to us, and he said, look, they're talking about wanting to dismiss the case because she's not answering the questions. Anyway,
3 weeks in.
Anyway, so I went, okay, all right. And so I just started writing down some key things, and I just went through all the things that had happened in the lead up to that period of time. And I just said, well, if that's the case, see all this stuff, I said, I'm happy to go trial by media. It's all fine. Like, I'm actually okay with that. I had actually reached out to some people here and said, this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I never thought this would happen, because I could not believe that this was what we were living.
Yeah.
Because no one talked about it. Yeah. Anyway, so that was, just another thing that happened that made it difficult. So that was, the end of the third week, and I just wrote it down and said, these are all the barriers that have been put in front of my 11-year-old up to this period of time. And, if you're wanting to drop the case, like, I'm happy to kick off. Like, I'm happy to get angry about this, because we're not here and got to this point for nothing.
Yeah.
So we went away for the weekend. We went down to my uncle's. They lived at Thirroul and had a lovely weekend down there. Came back and everything changed on the Monday. So the types of questions were better. The barrister objected to some things, and it was,
so your mama bear
sustained.
behaviour worked.
Well, look, I don't know if it was that or whether, they just decided to get things moving along.
Yeah.
And then, so I got to go in, Brent got to go in, it kind of finished up reasonably quickly in that last week. But yeah, I was not prepared for it at all.
Well, they were treated like little grown-ups.
Yes, they were. And most adults would find that a really, really difficult situation to be in.
I don't know how I'd handle a cross-examination like that.
No, well, I was doing it wrong, apparently. I did say to the judge at one point, I haven't done this before, like, year 10 mock trial does not count.
Did he give evidence?
Yes, and so did she.
Were you there for it?
Yeah. So she gave evidence, and I sat in there and listened, and I watched her lie, and she looked at me while she did it, and I just got up and left. I couldn't listen to it. And then he gave evidence, and he actually proved to everyone the type of man that he was when he gave his evidence. He was smug, and he made rude comments about his wife. Yeah. And yeah, it was just, and again, I listened to some of it, and then I got up and left.
He was convicted for the crimes against Pippa.
Yeah.
But not Rose.
Yeah.
Do you remember finding that out?
So this is going to sound weird, but to me, it didn't matter if he was found guilty or not, because I knew he was.
Yeah.
I knew my girls were telling the truth. When he was found guilty of most of I think nearly all the charges against Pippa, and not Rose, we decided that we wouldn't tell Rose about that at the time, because it wouldn't have meant anything to her either. She was 7.5.
She's young.
Yeah, she wasn't going to understand that. So, it was just, for them, it was, we're really proud that you told the truth, and because you did that, you've kept other people safe. The night that we found out, or the afternoon that we found out, I chose not to be here in Sydney for that. I stayed at home. Brent had flown up the day earlier, but no decision had been made at that point. He was at home. He was actually picking the kids up from school when we found out. So my cousin and my uncle were in the courtroom, and they came out and told me what had happened, and I don't think I really felt anything. Like, I didn't. Then we had lots of people, friends, come around, and like, who had been so supportive, and everything, and came around, and someone bought a bottle of champagne and like all this sort of thing, and then the police officer came around too. Like he sort of had become a friend over that time, you know. And I actually got up and left because and it wasn't because they were of anything they were doing. I couldn't celebrate what I already knew as truth.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone was celebrating. It was sort of a relief, but it was just this very weird thing where, you know, you can't celebrate that.
You also are celebrating, like, it feels kind of like you're celebrating a system that you've just watched traumatize your kids.
Yeah, that's it.
So it's like, yeah, we got the result we wanted, but
yeah,
we went through hell to get it.
we did. You know, and he was granted bail again. Like after that, he was allowed out until sentencing.
Why? Did the judge say?
So the judge said that he wasn't considered a risk to the community.
Right. But you've mentioned that they had other children in their lives.
Yeah. So that was a bit hard to swallow. It's like, okay, well, how bad do you have to be?
Yeah.
How bad do you have to be? So you're allowed to, do these things to children and you're not a risk.
Yeah.
So he wasn't a risk to the judge. Anyway, so he was allowed out, and then we had to do like the victim impact statements and things like that. So with the girls, with Pippa, wrote the victim impact statement, and then we wrote one for Rose as well, so that she didn't feel like she was being left out. And then we kind of meshed it a bit together, because it was an impact on our whole family, and that actually wasn't considered at the time.
Really?
So really, it was really only wanted Rose's. They really only wanted Pip's victim impact statement. And I was like, but we're all victims in this. Like it was a weird thing to do, and to be completely honest, when we did the victim impact statement, because we had seen Pip go from this vivacious, charismatic, happy, you know, had lots of friends, you know, this beautiful little girl, to a shell, you know, and she was so desperately sad. And so when I wrote it, I was so honest about that. And I actually went back and used, like, because this lady had written some lovely things about the types of girls that we had. And I used her descriptions of our kids to say this is what they were like and this is what we have right now. But this isn't the end for them. And they will go on to be strong and happy and live really good lives despite any of this. So, so we did I had to read the victim impact statement out in court, and then and he was still out at that point, and his wife got up and did a victim impact statement as if like how it would be bad for her for him to go to jail.
Right.
And I had to leave for that one too. That's actually the first time that I really had a blow up. Like I actually lost it outside
in the courtroom.
I was sitting outside, and this poor lady, she was Salvation Army lady. She came out to try and be nice to me. And I just wasn't having it. And I was just like, and I actually ended up saying, if you want to do something, you can pray for her soul, because she just lied. She just lied.
You got to laugh or you'll cry.
I was
like,
so angry.
Yeah.
It was, you know, out of everything that I could have been angry at, the poor Salvation Army lady, who was just this gorgeous, beautiful, supportive person who was, you know, impartial. Like she copped it. So that was really hard. And again, he got bail. And so he went home again. And then it wasn't. And so we finished court in May. It wasn't till September that he finally went to jail. Yeah. So, you know, and no one tells you about this.
No.
So, you know, I look at people, there's people out there who wait years and years for justice, and I can't call it a justice system. It's not, it's just a legal process. because it was so unjust, and it was so difficult. It was shit.
Yeah. It sounds like your experience was really shit.
Yeah, it was. And we're not alone. Like, I've had other people reach out, since our story became public and tell me about their story. And I've had people say, I actually had a lawyer say to me yesterday, I would never advise anyone to go to the police.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. And, they weren't saying that to be horrible, but they're saying that because they know what the system can be like and how it can be, for victims,
Do you have any thoughts towards the sentence? Or like you said, does that part not matter to you?
Oh, look, 3 years and 9 months, and he was out in 2.5 years.
It just doesn't, for everything the girls went through,
Yeah.
it just doesn't feel like a lot, does it?
Yeah, it doesn't. But then at the same time, I look now and go, what do they do? Who do they talk to?
Yeah.
I think, there's a bit of a life sentence there because they're very ostracized in the community from what I can tell. As I said, I've never seen them out in the community. So I can imagine that's quite isolating.
Yeah.
And, that's what happens when you are not a nice person.
If you had your time again, would you go to trial again?
That's a really hard question to answer because we've done the work.
Yeah.
To change the way. If it was done in the same way, if I knew then what I knew back in 2016, probably no. Yeah. I don't know how I could encourage anyone to go through that, but there was something else. I had a very good friend of mine who has been a victim of this type of crime, and she's one of the most special, strongest people I know, and she's never taken her offender to court, and it weighs heavily on her.
Yeah. And
she said to me one day that if you think that they can do it, do it.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So that was kind of always in the back of my head too. Yeah.
What were so I want to get to your advocacy, but I'm really interested to know, once everything was done, what did those weeks and months look like? Did your girls start to come alive again, or did it really take a long time?
Rose came out of the courtroom after she had finished her final cross-examination and went, all right, I'm finished. Can I go get my new high tops now? Because she had her eye on these high top basketball boots that she wanted to, and we were like, oh, well, once you finish, we'll go, we can go shopping and do that. So that was the first thing that she said. It was like, yep, done, close the book on that, I'm out, and she went back to school, and her teachers, she had 2 teachers at the time, and they're like, oh my God, she's just like this breath of fresh air. She's just walked back in like nothing's happened. It was 4.5 weeks after the school term had started, and she just sort of slotted back in and was king of the kids and living her best life. And then we had our little, and Maggie had sat there for 4.5 weeks too, waiting to give her evidence. And, she was a really crucial piece of the puzzle. She was able to, put people where they were at times that they said they were, and all of those things. Her evidence was very compelling, which is what the barrister has told us since. But she had to be in that space too, and she was in year 7. She was in high school, and it was hard. And she just, she had to go back into that and try and navigate that space as well. And she was incredible. And our little Pip, she struggled. She was in year 5, and she found it really hard just to find any joy in anything. And, that was, she did a lot of work.
Yeah.
She did a lot of work, and, and she very openly talks about this. because I think she should be totally celebrated for,
I
you
think
know,
all
the,
your girls
yeah,
should be
absolutely.
celebrated. They are bloody
Yeah.
superheroes.
They are. And, you know, she did the work to
Yeah.
get back in. I still remember her one day saying to me, we were sitting out the front of the basketball stadium and she didn't want to go in. She's like, I don't want to play. I don't want to be there. I don't want to be here anymore, Mum. I just don't want to be here anymore. And I said, oh, you know, like the world would just be such a sadder place for me if you went in it. Like I just can't even imagine what that would look like. And you've got so many things to look forward to. And so what do I have to look forward to? I said, well, one day you're going to have a job that you're going to love, and because she always loved helping people. Yeah, you know, I said, you know, you'll have a job and you'll love working. You like being helpful and doing those things. And, you know, one day you might get married, or, you know, you might not, or you might have children, or you might don't. And she said, I am never having children. And I said, why? Like, you know, and she goes, why would I have a baby so that they can have this sort of thing happen to them? And I was really thrown. Like, I was like, holy moly. Like, you know, I'd never considered that, you know. And I said to her, you know, well, what's, you know, like that, just because it happened to you doesn't mean it's going to happen to them. And she said, well, it happened to you and it happened to me. And, you know, because I had shared with the girls that sometimes bad things happen, but you can still have this amazing life, and that I was an example of that. And yeah, that was shocking to hear that from, you know, a little person. But look, you know, as I said, she's worked really hard. They've all worked really hard, and it has been up and down. And Rose has been really open about, you know, the last few years for her have been really challenging, particularly as the older girls have, you know, moved out or, you know, gone on to different things in their life. You know, she's sort of had that opportunity where she's been able to see things differently from an older point of view, and understand what happened and try and get her head around that, which has been really tricky. But, you know, they all just, they put in the work to try and contribute and be good humans and live their best life. You know, they're good, because we don't want to bog ourselves in that.
We've talked about how amazing they are, but what an amazing mum you are. Like, everything you've helped them get to that point. You've supported them every step of the way. You've held their vulnerabilities and every single moment they've had, down to your daughter feeling open to say something like, I don't want to have babies, and you supporting her through that. Like, they couldn't have done that without you. No,
but, you know, I'm very well supported too. You know, like I've got Brent, who's incredible, and I've got a really supportive family. And, you know, like when you do things like this, you have friends either step in or step out.
Yeah.
And I absolutely get it, because it's hard. Like, it's hard. And, you know, like there were people that, some of my friends had little children or were having babies, and I couldn't talk to them about this. You know, you already, as you know, when you have kids, you know, you're already a bit vulnerable anyway. Like, you feel like you're half crazy half the time. So it was really important for me not to burden people. But yeah, look, I was so well supported. I felt like I had support. My work were amazing. And I kept at it, and I loved the work that I did, and I loved working with young people, which is what I was doing at the time. And I, you know, so I think in that keeping things normal, you just have to keep moving.
Yeah.
You know, and there's people who've been a little bit critical, because we do share the story, in that, you know, they sort of say, oh, because you talk about it, you're anchoring yourself in it. But I do disagree with that, because the reality is that this is always going to be part of who we are.
I do think that if there's any good to come from this story, it is the fire that it put in all of your bellies to help make change for the kids that would come after you. Where did all of that start?
So it actually started when we were in court. So Glenn, who was our detective, who has become He's like family to us now. He had been in the child abuse squad for over a decade at that point, and he was telling me about this witness intermediary program that they were running in Sydney and Newcastle. So it was a program where a person who was trained, so they would either be like a psychologist or speech therapist or even teachers and people like that who know kids, were trained to help the child give the best evidence. So they would be part of the initial process. So when a child goes in and gives their initial statement, and then they would then be part of giving that initial evidence, interjecting if questions were too difficult, if it was outside the scope of that child's understanding.
Yep.
Really making it so that the child could participate equitably in the process.
And they're also a constant person
that
the child can get to know.
That's it. So they were there. It's court appointed, so they were there for that. And then 6 months later, or within 6 months, the child would then be cross-examined by someone who was court appointed as well. And that would be filmed, and that was then their evidence for court. So they never had to go to court.
So everything's pre-recorded?
Everything's pre-recorded. So that was, so they were doing that in Sydney and Newcastle. And that program started in 2015. So we weren't eligible because we were already in that process.
Right.
And it was reviewed in 2018, and they said it was best practice. The rights of the child were being, adhered to. It wasn't jeopardizing the rights of the offender to a fair trial. Everyone was happy about it. Defense, prosecution, everyone was really happy about how it was looking. And so they extended the program again for another 3 years in Sydney and Newcastle.
Right.
Anyway, so I had sort of been following along and seeing what was happening. So the day that that Brent actually came up during the trial, like when we were waiting for the verdict,
yep,
I started reading about it, and then I thought, I'm just going to write a letter to our local member. So we hadn't even had a verdict at that point, just to say, look, this is what's happened, and I can't believe that this has happened to my children, and there's a better way. So why aren't we doing the better way? So I did that, and as I said, that was before we had the verdict, and I heard back from the local member that I needed to get in touch with the Attorney General. So then I started writing to the Attorney General, and I got this really nice response telling me that, we have this program where the evidence is pre-recorded, and then the children are in a separate room and they're cross-examined so everything that we had been through that I said was not working, that was what they were giving me as someone from the country. This is what we do for you guys. And
you're like, well, you didn't do it for us.
Yeah, it's like, well, it sucks. Like that system that you reckon is really good for those kids in regional areas sucks. And you know that because you've got a different program running in Sydney and Newcastle that is working and is less traumatizing. So I'd been doing this little side project for 6 years, and then Rose came to me and said, she was like, oh, Mum, I want to do some fundraising. And I was like, oh, okay, who do you want to fundraise for? And she talked about Bravehearts, which is the, Empower, Protect, Educate.
Yep.
Child abuse that was set up in Queensland by Hetty Johnson back in the day.
Yeah.
So we had used a lot of their resources when we were talking through things and trying to, advocate for the kids and whatever. So she wanted to raise money for them. And I was like, okay, so what do you want to do? I want to ride my bike around Australia. Yeah.
That's a long way.
Yeah, I was like, that's probably not going to happen, Rose. Like, I know you don't like school, but that's not a thing. Anyway, so she said, yeah, well, I want to raise money for them. And she said, what about if I ride from Sydney to Coffs Harbour? Because our detective had moved to Coffs Harbour. I was like, still a long ride, Rose. Like, we need to nut this out. And I said and Pip was on the journey then by that point too. Oh, that'd be really good. Yeah, we should do that. And I said, okay, well, if we do something like this, what's something else that you think people need to know about what you experienced? And they were like, both of them pretty much at the same time said, court is shit. And I was like, okay, tell me more about that. And then they sort of talked about, how horrible it was and being in there for days and, how they couldn't have anyone in there with them, and so all the things that we've basically just talked about.
Yeah.
They named that as the things that were challenges. And so then I told them about this other thing, and I said, do you think something like that could work? And they're like, oh yeah, that would have made it easier. And the other thing is, it wasn't about being easier, it was about that participating equitably. That's the biggest thing that I want people to understand, is this isn't about making it easier. It's about giving them what they needed at that time, that moment in time.
It's protecting the childlike nature of them amongst
and
it all.
recognizing that they're not adults.
They're not adults.
Yeah. So anyway, they were quite enthusiastic about the whole thing, and I said, all right, well, let's see what we can do. And so we said, let's make a petition. So I wrote a petition, and then I thought, oh, well, I may as well go and see our local member again, who happened to be someone known to me. So we went and saw him, Justin Clancy, and went through, and he had known us for some time and had no knowledge of what had happened, as a family. So he was very understanding and understandably distressed, by the whole thing. So we wrote the petition, and he presented the petition to Parliament. But then we realised that the girls actually couldn't talk about what happened to them.
Because their names were suppressed by the court.
Because of their ages.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had to talk about that, and I didn't know how to get around that. So we're in the meantime, Rose is planning routes to get
for the bike ride.
For the bike ride. And so we narrowed it down from, you can't ride on a national highway, Rose, like that's just not happening. What else can you do? She's a mountain bike rider. So she was plotting mountain bike tracks all over from Sydney up to Coffs Harbour. So she's doing that on the side. Pip's getting some social media stuff organised. Everything's sort of happening. We'd been in contact with Bravehearts. All these things were happening, but they couldn't tell their story. So they were just two kids wanting to go for a bike ride, basically,
Yeah.
Anyway, so I reached out to the Let Us Speak campaign.
Which is run by Nina Fennell.
Yes.
For listeners, Nina Fennell is an incredible advocate for sexual assault victims, children in that space. She is a victim survivor herself. And the Let Her Speak campaign was exactly this. She was the one behind Grace Tame, who helped Grace be able to tell her story, which I'm assuming is how you found her.
Yes. Yeah.
So you reached out to Nina.
So I reached out to Nina. And I actually sent an email to probably 15 different organisations trying to get somebody to just tell me, like, how much trouble are we going to get in
if we say our names?
Yeah. And so I reached out to Nina, and it was Mark Lawyers at the time, because Michael Bradley had also been involved in that case. And they got back to me within 15 minutes, both of them.
Wow.
And we've since reflected on that, and Nina was like, well, you didn't just come to me with a story, you came to me with a solution. So that was sort of the point of difference. Like it was like, yeah, this happened, but here's a way to make it easier for other people. So we did that, and we so she kind of was doing stuff in the background, and we had to get Rose's name cleared by the court. So Pip was old enough at 17.
So once she hit
17, she could speak.
Right, but
because Rose was underage, she couldn't speak about Rose. So it was all very complicated and convoluted. And Rose actually summed it up really well. She said, Mum, I had a man telling me that I wasn't allowed to talk about this for a really long time. And then I went to court, and I had men standing in front of me telling me that I had to talk about this for days. And now they're telling me that I can't talk about this again. And she's like, it's my story.
And the law, like, to be clear, is there to protect child victims. But if the child victim is saying, I would like to speak about it, it's bizarre that you then have to go to court and pay a lot of money to try and get that removed, which is what you guys did.
Yeah.
Well, what Nina and
not Nina,
her company
what
did.
They did for us, And look, and it was a good process, because they, at all times, they wanted to make sure that this was Rose's decision.
Yeah.
And Pip's decision, and there were lots of jumping off points, where if they went, oh no, this is too much, I can't do it, there were all of those protections in place for them to bow out or to opt out if they didn't want to. So that was a process in itself, and fortunately they didn't have to go to court for that to happen because I think that physical having to go there would have been really tricky for them. So we had this petition with the New South Wales Parliament for probably 3 months leading up to the bike ride, and it wasn't gaining signatures in the way that it felt like it was.
Because how many signatures do you need to make a difference?
So for it to be spoken about in Parliament, you need 20,000 e-signatures. Yeah.
So the idea was we go public with our story in the media.
Yeah.
Then we get more signatures. Then we can push this legislation through.
Right? Yeah. So we tried to do it without the media first.
Yeah.
But it wasn't gaining traction in the way that it could. Because, again, it wasn't personal, right?
Mm.
It was just, this obscure thing without faces. So we did the bike ride. We started at the Downing Centre and the girls rode over to the Harbour Bridge and all that sort of thing. And then we went and they did all the trails. And it was actually at the end of it that we found out that we got the news that they could use their names.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
So they finished that, and then we went home and we came back and did all the media and things for the Justice Shouldn't Hurt,
which was Nina's campaign after Let Her Speak.
Yeah, so that was the campaign that the girls were the face of, and our family were the face of that one. So
it is one thing to say, let's talk to the media,
yeah.
And that's another thing to then have that story out there.
Mm.
How was it for your family? How did the girls handle that attention?
Well, we always do SWOT analysis of things. So we had a bit of, what's the strength of this, and obviously the benefits were that, changes could potentially be made for other children so that they didn't have to experience what the girls did. The weaknesses and the threats were really around what would be said and done to them, because they had kept it relatively private. There weren't that many people, even in their friendship circles, that knew about what had happened. Our family and our good friends were obviously aware of it, but not everybody. Clearly not everyone we know knew what had happened. So that was a threat for us that would happen. But yeah, as I said, the strengths and opportunities were that there would be a different way of doing things for kids moving forward, and they were really proud to be able to be part of that. So when this story broke, they only received positive feedback, and even a couple of parents of the kids were came to me and were like, it all makes sense now, everything sort of fell into place for people around us. The story broke in the November. By the end of December, I think there was 69,000 signatures.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and people were saying it's a no-brainer. This is a no-brainer. Why aren't we doing this?
And then the Premier announced.
In
2023.
Yes, $64.3 million to expand the program so that all children in New South Wales had a chance to participate equitably in the legal process.
What a win.
Yes, so it was a huge win, and we went to Parliament House and stood in front of the nation's media and made a statement, and Rose stood in front of them, no paper, no nothing, and charmed everyone and said, I want to see this go national. We're still waiting for that to happen.
I was going to say, where are we at now? Because that was a few years ago.
Yeah,
it's 2026 now.
Yeah, so that's 3 years ago. So I have checked in. I checked in with Michael Daly at the Deniliquin Ute Muster to make sure that it was still, a priority that this was going to happen. We attended the opening of the court for children, which is down on Elizabeth. No, it's not. Is that Elizabeth Street? Liverpool Street. Down on Liverpool Street, across from World Square, there's actually one of the oldest courthouses in Australia is there, and they've converted that so that it's a court that children go to when they're giving this sort of evidence. Yeah, it's really old.
It's really old.
Yeah, so Judge Kate Trail is sort of spearheading things down there in this space.
Great.
And she's been fabulous the whole way along. She was the first one to be trained in the witness intermediary program. I've met 2 witness intermediaries in Albury. One of them actually became one after she heard me speak about this somewhere else.
Wow.
So that was really, I actually cried. I cried when they said, because it's like, oh, it's actually happening. So we've had people, children and parents let us know that they have participated in this way. So, we know that it's happening. I just want to know that it continues and that the government continue to fund the program.
So right now, is it not all over Australia? It's still in only select places?
New South Wales.
Just New South Wales.
So, of course, because, the legal system
but it is
different.
All across New South Wales. But
yeah.
That's
so
amazing.
Every child can do that. Yeah. So it is. It's a huge change. And, people are like, oh, it hasn't done anything for your kids. So, well, yeah, actually it has. Like, they've got that satisfaction in knowing that other children don't have to go through what they did.
Well, you haven't put your fighting hat down. You've entered politics.
I have.
What's prompted that? You're running as an independent in your local area.
I am. So, look, I think, if we had have had this conversation even 3 years ago, if someone said, oh, you're going to be running as an independent candidate for the seat of Farrer, I would have said, you're kidding yourself. There is no way that I would do that. Like, being a politician has never been on my dance card, but it's sort of being a representative of people is. And I just, after we did this, you sort of look around and go, well, what else are we missing out on regionally? And, I look at healthcare. Like I lost my dad last year. He lives in a small country town. I lived in a small country town, and he didn't get diagnosed with skin cancer, and that led to him it metastasizing, and he died, and that probably wouldn't have happened if he lived somewhere else. It at the time, because it was COVID as well, so telehealth appointments don't really show up, these things. But he did all his treatment with us in Albury, 2.5 hours away from home.
Yeah.
So,
because you've since moved from Albury, which...
Yeah, we just live outside of Albury now. So we, have a little bit of land outside. It's peace and quiet. It's nice. We did that in 2015, actually.
Right.
Moved out
so
there.
Pretty quickly after.
Just to have a change. We needed to have a change.
Fair.
Get the girls. They didn't feel safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair.
So, they like it where we are. But yeah, look, it was really, when you recognise that things are unjust, and I think it was Professor Judy Cashmore, who works in that sexual assault space, she called it postcode injustice, what happened to the kids. And I have just seen that more and more frequently. My eyes have been opened to that. And so that's why I am where I am now, in going, well, if we want to make change, then you've got to be prepared to stand up. And also that recognition that by telling story, and you're a journalist, by telling story and getting people to not just understand an issue, but to feel the impact of those things, so that they are inspired to make change or support the making of change. I think that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now.
Well, like with your story, if most people don't go through the system, so how would they ever know that there's these issues unless we talk about it? How are your girls going now? You've got a 17-year-old and your others are in their 20s?
Yeah, so Maggie's turning 23 this year. She's left the nest, so she's currently living in Melbourne, living her best poor life, as she tells me. Look, she's just an amazing person. She's beautiful. She's so supportive, and she's caring and kind, and knows how to laugh at herself, which is very handy for her. She's great. Pip is studying paramedicine and nursing. So she's doing that. She's sort of between Melbourne and home. She's doing a bit of both, and she turns 21 in April, which is exciting for her. And yeah, Rose is in year 12. She plays AFL, and she's doing vet fitness and things like that at school. She's hoping to go into the police force one day.
Wow.
That's sort of her big plan. But look, they're all great. They have their days, as we all do. And, you know, they work through this, and they recognise that, you know, some days are harder than others, but most days are really good. So that's sort of where we're at. And Bren and I are just getting old.
How proud are you as their mum?
Oh, I think they're fabulous. Don't you worry, they've also been teenage girls. They have really tested the boundaries from time to time. But look, I'm super proud of them, and I'm proud that this isn't their whole story. This is just a little part of it. I'm proud that they stood up and made the change that they did. I'm proud that they can get up and stand in front of, you know, adults and the media and the Premier and say, we're okay, but we needed to make this change so that other kids can be too. I think that's really important. So look, and as I said, they are not perfect, and nor am I. And but yeah, they're good kids. Yeah, they're great humans.